Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Greg Soulje is with us here today, agricultural meteorologist, and you're going to give us an update on how things are looking for the, 7-10 days ahead, Greg?
Yeah, we're going to take a look at that over the next couple of weeks. People are sort of in a conundrum and a little panic mode because of this refreshing summertime, if not a hint of autumn air coming on in. And the frost word has been kicked around probably too much. And too much of an Armageddon feel for some folks throwing that out there. Not going to be anything that I think irreparably harms crops, and things continue to move along, unfortunately, in a drier mode and in more of a drought-ridden mode going forward here, at least in the shorter term, just like you and I have been talking about. So we'll take a look at that, the tropics, and kind of bring everybody up to speed here in this first week of September.
Well, there's your slide, so go ahead and take it away.
All right, then, off and running here into a meteorological autumn. It's a bookkeeping thing. September 1 starts autumn. December 1 starts December, etc., so forth and so on. A couple of 2 or 3 weeks ahead of the usual astronomical start to those dates and seasons. And so it is what it is. And we've got some rain in the forecast. And I tell you, there's growing areas that do need rainfall. And it's always the juggling act this time of the year. Harvest, get it done early and often when it's ready to go, versus let's get moisture in the ground before they get locked up good and tight for the wintertime season, and or it comes down in frozen form. So that will be the problem going forward. And we continue to hold sway here on what's going to be, I think, still a dismal, for good reasons, tropical season. I think it's going to be being a bust in the Atlantic, but we'll talk about that going forward. And increasing dryness and drought, probably into some of the generally eastern and central and southern Corn Belt locales. And there's some corn harvest, by the way, going on south of Arthur, Illinois. I believe that's in east central Champaign County. A lot of dust getting kicked up, and so be ready for that going forward. Anyway, there's some rain up through Minnesota. That's moving southward. A few sprinkles from St. Louis to the west and south. Most of the plains and westernmost Corn Belt areas have seen rain, and big rain totals the past couple of weeks down into the central and southern plains. But we move towards maturity. We've seen some quality loss as well, especially on late planted varieties, especially in the bean side of things. Wouldn't be surprised that additional numbers that come out later on this week have a little more degradation on some of the bean quality harvest issues, or getting ready to harvest issues across the Corn Belt locales. Dry weather continues on central and southern plains. The heat is winding on down. The showers and thunderstorms, there were big rains the past couple of weeks, eastern and southern Kansas, Oklahoma. So a fair amount of those winter wheat fields have been well recharged and are ready to go, with planting in mind, and a range of temperatures. They were into the 80s yesterday, or make that Sunday into the southern Canadian prairie, 80s across the Dakotas yesterday. You'll be about 30 degrees cooler going forward here, and still some summertime warmth on the central and southern plains. The heat, if you will, focused well west of the divide. It's coming back. This pattern shift here that's getting just beaten down too much is expected to move cooler air moving in, but basically a warmer weather pattern on its heels just beyond about the next 5 to 7 days from west to east. So hang in there if you're looking for still some summertime warmth. And any frost that does materialize, northern Great Lakes areas, pockets of the western Corn Belt, things are fully mature and I think ready to go. So I don't think there'll be any issues regarding patchy frost, maybe an hour at mid 30 degree levels into some of the cooler areas of the western and northwestern Corn Belt, probably Thursday morning. Hot, humid weather. I missed that. And down through Florida, the summer is winding down, and the temperatures as well. A couple of boundaries have made it all the way down to the Gulf Coast areas, but expanding dryness and drought. That's going to teleconnect northward into these central, southern, and eastern Corn Belt locales over the next month or two. I don't just have a lot of confidence. We may have 1 or 2 systems that make it in to the southeastern states in some form or another, probably sheared apart, but not a lot of optimism going forward with rain in the deep south and southeastern states, except for a couple of frontal boundaries that have taken the edge off the heat and humidity. Maybe one of these years where what we get called these homegrown tropical systems, they get going. We relax the wind shear. You got fronts or systems in the Gulf Coast, the northern Gulf of Mexico, Southwest Atlantic, and one day you've got a little low, the next day you got a depression, and you're off to the races there. But sometimes those are not significant wind or surge makers when they do get going. Maybe one of those years anyway, just from doing this all these years. Anyway, so short-term dryness across the Delta and deep south and southeastern United States. The heat continues out across the west. That is favoring small grain harvest in the Pacific Northwest. Another few days of 95 to 105 degree heat running into the Pacific Northwest, Washington State southward into the valleys of California. Flash flood watches into the southern Sierra. The monsoon setup continues very robust out there, and there are two tropical systems in the Pacific. I don't know, they say El Nino's over and done with. I don't know. You got a more busier tropical Pacific going on than you do in the Atlantic at the current time. So there's the Tuesday afternoon anyway. Weather maps and charts. Some wet weather is appreciated across the deep southeastern and mid-south areas. Wet weather and the rainy season has helped dryness and drought through Florida. You can see the downpours east of LA and into the Imperial and San Joaquin valleys of California. That's why we've got those flash flood washes up in effect and some shower activity into the upper Midwest. And that cold front will be increasing in scope and coverage, and two more coming out of the Canadian Prairie. So better coverage rainfall, probably up to a half to 2/3 of an inch in the northern Corn Belt locales. You get to I-70, maybe a 1/10 of an inch in spotty to scattered coverage. So it'll be a real breakdown from northwest to southeast. The monsoon setup continues in the southwest. Wet weather down through Florida. By tomorrow morning, pretty good zone and covering of showers and some embedded thunder at probably 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, as mentioned, into the upper Midwest, the upper Mississippi Valley, Great Lakes region, and it will trail down and out with regard to coverages and amounts as you get down south of I-70. There's the afternoon cold front drop-off in temperature readings in the Mississippi Valley, and a cooler day ahead. Don't think we'll get out of the 50s and 60s across the Dakotas, the uppermost Midwest and southern Canadian Prairie tomorrow afternoon. By Thursday, the rains into the eastern and southern Corn Belt looking a little overdone with coverages, but at least it'll be enough to settle the dust and hopefully get a little topsoil rejuvenation going. But anything of a significant recurring wet weather pattern, don't see it here in the days and weeks to come. Like we've been talking about, expanding dryness and drought in the fall season for the Corn Belt with an early and often harvest season. And the Plain States may be the more optimistic. In the Corn Belt areas west of the Mississippi, the more optimistic areas for organized rain going forward. There's the next day or two. Best coverages in a couple of areas, Great Lakes, far northeastern Corn Belt areas, and back into parts of Kansas and Missouri. Wet weather through the Gulf Coast and some pretty good downpours expected down through Southern California for a change. And that desert to ground area, boy, that means flash flood potential and maybe a couple of dust storms still in the areas of Arizona, desert locales along and south of that I-4 corridor. Marginal risk for a couple of stronger storms, the upper Midwest this afternoon. Tomorrow afternoon, some stronger storms possible, sections of Kansas and more so in through Missouri, as well as the likelihood of some slight risk potential for a couple of damaging thunderstorms into parts of Kansas too. Tropics, Atlantic Basin, just one little thing, although you can see some cloudiness in the Gulf, some thunderstorm activity east of the Bahamas. You know, it's that area, I think, that's probably, and although it's not marked for anything development, it may be one of these, as I just mentioned, these homegrown systems that may get going. One day it's a low, the next day it's a depression. You enhance the rainfall prospects, then out to sea it goes. The only real significant system is coming off the African coast. We got a little break in the wind shear and the Saharan dust issue. So pretty good likelihood that that's going to, in that corridor there, that cone in the next 5 to 7 days, pretty good likelihood of at least 60 or 70% we'll get some development there. But that same system will be running into a lot of wind shear. Fronts are caught up into upper level wind patterns that are stronger. And when there are stronger wind patterns up aloft, that equates to wind shear. And you can't get anything spun up, even if it comes out of the Atlantic. It'll tend to lose some of its identity and its strength. So that's the thinking down there. Pacific, two systems, number 12, kicking moisture into Mexico, Southern California, and Arizona, enhancing their monsoon setup out there. And Kiko out moving westward into the open waters of the Pacific, no bearing on anyone's plane here and the thought process going forward in that particular part of the Pacific Basin. So cool air on the move. There'll be some frost in the upper Great Lakes areas, Green Bay, Arrowhead of Minnesota. They've already had it there already. Maybe the mid and upper Red River Valley of the north, no bearing on spring rains. If we do get a frost patch in the northwesternmost areas of the Corn Belt, crops are probably far enough along. It should be of no consequence. Just stuff last week was just stupid on I'll just say it in social media, just the stuff that was getting plastered out there with temperatures in the mid and upper 20s and low 30s. And it's the end of the growing season and crop losses and all that. That's just not my world. So some mid and upper 30s for an hour right at daybreak in some of those colder spots, Sioux Empire region, along the Minnesota border, the northwestern part of the Corn Belt areas, and that's it. Maybe a few upper 30s into parts of northern Illinois and the Wabash Valley of Indiana. That's it. Someone may even have some frost on their pickup truck top some point Thursday or Friday morning in the Midwest. That's it. Temperatures still up around 100 across the western states looking forward. And again, as mentioned, some of the better coverage moisture into the Great Lakes areas of the Corn Belt over the next 24 to 48 hours. There's a snapshot on some of the lows by Thursday morning, and some 35 to 38 degree lows are possible in the west and northwestern Iowa. This would be right at sunrise for a daybreak, and these, I think, are still a little bit on the colder, too cold side of the ledger. So we'll have it out there. Don't think it's going to cause any harm, any grain fill, black layered, anything like that. I think we're going to be okay. There's probably more of a concern on the dryness and drought related issues with either late planted corn or beans going forward. I think that's the bigger issue and conundrum out there. And we've seen that the past couple of reports coming in on Monday morning as some crop ratings that are inching towards that poor and very poor category, probably double digit mode now into parts of the Midwest. High temperatures between Friday and Saturday into the 60s and 70s, 50s through the Great Lakes region. This will be short-lived. The moderation begins quickly west to east across the plains into the Corn Belt next week. So there's that low. To put things into perspective, you can see that low across Canada on that trough. Last week's model runs, and we look at them. I mean, we base the forecast on. We look at them. Makes for good conversational purposes on these get-togethers. But that low at one time on the early model runs, trying to find the right layer of cold air, if you will, was parked all the way down into Minnesota and Wisconsin. So how many miles north of that is it's seeing here. And that is the story, that the coldest air stays to the north. There's a lot of motion of the atmosphere. This type of setup with that trough moving on through. Quickly, we'll have low cloudiness on one side, mid-level cloudiness as temperatures warm up aloft on the other side. So I'm just not completely on board with all this frost yapping going on. Probably in some spots, yes, but widespread killing, no. Trough moves on out, more of a Pacific flow, and the jet stream winds, the lines weaken. There's not many of them, and hence the steering currents weaken. The temperatures begin to warm. There's a weak system moving into the Pacific Northwest, weak system from the plains of the western Corn Belt between Monday and Tuesday of next week. And there is the perspective here on cold, high pressure building on in, probably even the chilliest of the year, maybe in the interior Great Lakes region Sunday. But out of the Corn Belt locales. And then moderation begins between Monday and Tuesday next week. You can see a boundary setting up over the areas west of the Missouri River, where some rain will get going late in the weekend, early next week as well, and probably a return to some showery weather conditions where we need it. Probably not much opportunity for advance on early harvest, but we'll start the moisture process. There it is, the next 7 days. That snapshot through Oklahoma and Texas is more so into the early next week time frame. That rain that you see through the upper Midwest, Great Lakes areas, far eastern Corn Belt, that is over the next 24 to 48 hours. And the wet weather is of a flash flooding variety down through Old Mexico and Arizona. Here is the drought monitor, and this is the incorrect one, unfortunately. I forgot to put the new one on in, but is still pretty much indicative of what's been going on. Really into central Illinois, Champaign County, Edgar, Coles County, moderate and severe drought there. The expanding dryness continues in the eastern and southern Corn Belt. We're teleconnecting with some of those dry areas in the Mississippi River Valley. Little change in areas along and west of the divide. This is the thing that I put in there and forgot to put the drought monitor in. This is the seasonal outlook going forward. It came out on the 31st, and it really backs up what Sarah and I have been talking about here across the Midwest, that this fall season will be drought-ridden, and before we get anything going, it'll be an early and often harvest season. And if you want concern, that is it right there in that shades of yellow, Ohio, Indiana, into Illinois, and drought persists, if not worsens, into parts of the Corn Belt, into the lower Mississippi Valley. The only real significant improvement is coming out of the Pacific Northwest and western states, down in through the Rio Grande, and that's probably going to be due due because of a tropical system or two that will come in off the Pacific with time, and just some troughiness up aloft in the Pacific Northwest. But the middle part of the country is still going to be drought ridden with an early, often, as we keep saying, harvest season. And there may be some quality issues going forward on late planted corn, or more likely the bean side of the ledger. The upper air over the next 6 to 10 days, that configuration, that trough is all the way into eastern Canada already. Winds up aloft are coming out of the southwestern states, so some moisture potential into the west and southwest. And this is through the 7th and 11th of September, and more or less probably closer geared towards the 7th and 8th of September. Still some lingering cool air. Warmth moves in through the sections of Big Sky Country and along and west of the Missouri. Shower activity, more or less scattered, and some organized rainfall. Probably gets in the way of small grain harvest, but boy, that's another drought-ridden area of the country into the Pacific Northwest. And if we were to go out the next 2 weeks, the upper air wind pattern is very favorable for a nice turnaround in temperatures. Most of the troughiness is anchored west of the Missouri River, and most of it really along the divide on westward. And there's nothing of apparent issues in the tropics as well going forward, at least in the upper air configuration. The cool air into the northeast of New England, late season 80-degree warmth into the Mississippi Valley, 80 to 85 into the western Corn Belt locale, some cooling across the southwestern reaches of the country, a little more favorable setup for any of the drier areas of the Pacific Northwest, along the northern and central divide, either side of that, up through Big Sky Country, which is good news, parts of the Dakotas as well, assuming you've got spring grain harvest wrapped up there, northward into the southern Canadian prairie, and at least a more normal rainfall pattern, which is not impressive in late summertime, early autumn into the eastern Corn Belt locales, and fronts are still hung up, and there may be some tropical influence down through Florida. So that is the story, Sarah. I think the 17th is our next get together, right?
It is. Yes, it is. Looking forward to that already.
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of it on a longer winded, short term approach to the forecast going forward here. And so it goes. Dryness, some drought related issues in the eastern Corn Belt locales. I just have a gut feeling that if whatever we get going in the tropics is going to be very disappointing if you want to monitor that kind of stuff. It's good news for folks in the southeastern part of the country. And I think just too much overkill and all the frost talk going on across parts of the western and northwestern Corn Belt. Each model run keeps backing off on the cold, and that's kind of been our thinking around here. And once we get out of that scenario, I think we're in good shape until we at least approach the seasonal frost dates across the Midwest. And if you're not done with harvest by Thanksgiving or sooner, don't come calling Sarah and I.
Right. Yeah, no clickbait headlines here, right? I mean,
absolutely.
We lay it out there.
Just the facts and a few opinions once in a while. But last week was just stupid. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. And I used to chase that stuff around. I just don't do it anymore. So this is where you get your information here on the radio, This Week in Agribusiness, farm progress sites and magazines and digital feeds and all that. So this is where you get the correct information.
Exactly. Well, Greg, thank you so much. We'll catch up with you in a few days, and we appreciate all of you tuning in as well.